There's a moment you see past the smile, past the curves, past the story she tells. You see the pattern, the projection, the emotional currency she trades on. You see her shadow, and you don't look away. And in that second, she accuses. Maybe it's a whisper, you're paranoid. Maybe it's venom, you're unstable, cold. But this is no test of sincerity, it's punishment. Because Jung warned, those who see too much become dangerous. You didn't fall in love with a dream. You fell for a facade. And once the illusion cracked, beyond the Instagram highlights, beyond the laughter on her lips, you couldn't unsee her reflections. This isn't fantasy, it's her nature. And when a man sees it, makes no moves to preserve the myth, she strikes. She paints you as the problem, the jealous fool, the one refusing to bend. That's the curse. Seeing her becomes threatening. Your clarity becomes her chaos. The deeper your perception, the heavier her sabotage. When she steps into the frame and calls you obsessive or controlling, you don't argue. You refuse to shrink. Because every word you speak to, explain, you give her more evidence for her narrative. The average man apologizes. He says, I just care. He pleads to be understood. She listens, but that doesn't mean she hears him. Because in her eyes, your insight is guilt. What Jung taught is simple. Most people see what they want. Few see what lies beneath. And the moments you do, women punish it. You become the villain. That's the trap many men fall into. They think understanding equals connection. They believe truth equals freedom. But women don't live in logic. They live in emotional currencies. Understanding her patterns isn't safe. It's a threat. And just like Jung knew, truth is dangerous, especially when it outruns the projections she's built you to reflect. So if this video cuts deep, if you found yourself watching your own history, reliving her words against your mind, then welcome. You're not broken. You're awake. But that awakening is what makes emotion your battlefield. Because she can't lose the game when she doesn't believe there is a game. You have to point it out. And when you do, you become the villain you were never meant to be. Stay with me, because seeing truth is only the beginning. Holding frame when she flips the script, that is where power lives. And this video is your secret code to staying unshakable. She says she wants honesty. She says she wants a real man. She says, just be open with me. But that's not the full truth. Because the moment you actually show her reality, the moment you call out her projections, her tests, her manipulation, she recoils, she twists, she makes you the problem. Why? Because Carl Jung said it clearly. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. That includes her. Clarity is not intimacy for her. Clarity is invasion. It's exposure, vulnerability, the collapse of the carefully curated mask. You think you're helping her. You think you're giving love when you say, you don't love me, you love control. This isn't connection, it's a power play. But you've just done what Jung called withdrawing the projection. You've stopped playing her emotional puppet, and now she has to face herself. That's the one thing she can't do, because if she's forced to admit the patterns, that her validation addiction runs deeper than her feelings, that she's building chaos just to feel seen, that her love has always been conditional, then the illusion dies. And women don't let illusions die easily. Here's the truth most men never learn. She doesn't fear you seeing her. She fears you seeing through her, through the drama, through the shame games, through the sudden coldness after intimacy. She'll say, you're overthinking. You're so negative. Why do you always assume the worst? But these are not responses. They are deflections. Because your insight removes her power. And when a woman loses emotional leverage, her ego panics. She can't seduce the man who sees the trap. She can't guilt the man who doesn't flinch. She can't control the man who doesn't chase her love anymore. You want to know why she called you toxic? why she said you were too intense, why she told her friends you were emotionally unstable. Because Jung taught, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But she won't go there, not until the pain is unbearable, not until the illusion no longer works. So instead, she makes it your fault. Because if she admits that you're right, that you do see her clearly, then she'd have to destroy the entire identity she's built. And no one burns their mask willingly. So what does she do? She flips it. She accuses you. She calls your insight judgment. Your peace becomes distance. Your silence becomes emotional abuse. Because if she can't control you emotionally, she'll punish you socially. That's the price of clarity. That's the curse of seeing through her. And Jung warned us, the man who brings light into darkness will not be thanked. He will be hated, feared, and often destroyed. But only if he chooses to keep explaining himself. So don't. You've already seen too much. Now it's time to hold that gaze and never blink. You didn't choose to upset her. You just woke up. And the moment you woke up, stopped seeking her validation, she had only one move left: make you the villain. Because Carl Jung taught, all consciousness is unconscious in relation to something. When you raise the lights on her unseen emotional world, she's forced to face you, and that terrifies her. The awakened man is like a mirror of her worst fears, exposure. So she begins to recast you, not because you are wrong, but because your presence reminds her what she won't admit. You say nothing. She accuses, you're being distant. You speak truth. She says, you're so negative. You hold your frame. She whispers, you're emotionally unavailable. And the room turns. People side with her. Friends share her story. You become the villain in your own life. In Jungian terms, you have become the shadow's image, the scary guy who sees too much, feels too little, or so she wants everyone to think. See? While you stared into your own depths, she stared back and saw her reflection and refused to own it. So she creates a narrative. You become distant, not because you're centered, but because you're unmanageable. You're cold, not because you don't care, but because she can't unravel your calm. You're overthinking because she needs you confused, not composed. She's constructing her image attack because Jung warned that the ego resists the deeper self. You've become the deeper self she fears, and so she destroys your identity to protect her illusion. You don't defend. You don't explain. You don't apologize. Why? Because she only has her power when you doubt yourself. If you hold your identity intact, if you don't chase her version, if you don't bend to her projection, you stay free. Here's how the villain archetype plays out. She whispers to your friends, he changed. He's not like he used to be. She posts stories, subtly dropping your flaws. She turns casual observers into believers of your guilt, all while your only crime was seeing through her. Jung wrote of the shadow projection. When she sees her flaws in you, she tries to shatter you so she doesn't have to face herself. And now you carry her confusion on your shoulders. You walk into rooms branded as toxic, unavailable, or emotionally unstable. No one asks why you're silent, because she's already sold them the story. But here's the key. Awake men don't need to justify, they just need to exist. People will believe the story she tells, especially if it sells the emotional hero narrative. Let's reframe. If she wants chaos, you become stillness. If she wants reaction, you give presence. If she wants drama, you remain composed. That's how the villain becomes the mythic hero. She wanted a story. You became her plot twist. And now, as Jung would predict, your clarity terrifies everyone because you remind them there is a deeper level beyond the emotional mirage. And the only way to preserve her world is to paint you as the destroyer, That's how emotional warfare works. Few men see it, less survive it. But the man who holds his selfhood in the fire, he becomes untouchable, while she's still burning. There's a reason she keeps asking questions. Why are you so quiet? Don't you have anything to say? Say something, anything. She isn't seeking answers. She's trying to pull you back into her script, because the moment you stopped reacting, the moment you didn't defend, you triggered something ancient in her psyche, her own shadow rising. Carl Jung warned that silence is the mirror where the unconscious is forced to stare back at itself. And women, especially modern validation-fueled women, are rarely made to confront that mirror. They live in reaction, in feedback loops, in performance. They define reality by how you respond. So when you give them nothing, not even a flinch, their world shakes. Not because you're cruel, but because you've stopped playing the role she assigned to you. You're no longer the puppet. You've become the screen where she projects her chaos. And when you don't talk, when you stay still, composed, unfazed, she starts to hear things she never wanted to hear. Her guilt, her insecurity, her manipulation, her control. Silence becomes her courtroom, and she's the only one on trial. The more she pleads for engagement, the more you remain unmoved, the faster her emotional tactics collapse. You're not punishing her, you're forcing her to meet herself. That's why Jung believed the deepest form of transformation wasn't conversation, but confrontation with one's own shadow. And your silence, that's the confrontation she fears the most. Because when you say nothing, she has to wonder, did she go too far? She has to ask, is he walking away? She has to sit in the discomfort of not being able to control the outcome. It's not your silence that hurts her. It's that your silence reveals her motives. And when the mask falls, when she sees herself, raw and unfiltered, you've done what no man before you dared to do, held a mirror without saying a word. That's real power. But most men fail here. They think silence is passive. They think silence is retreat. Wrong. Silence is sovereignty. Because when she throws words at you like knives and you don't bleed, she doesn't know whether to run or beg for more. She'll twist, she'll scream, she'll call you toxic, cold, dismissive. Let her. It's her trial, not yours. And in that space of stillness, where her emotions echo and receive no audience, you redefine your presence, not as reactive man, but as unbreakable myth. She thought your silence was weakness, but now her entire identity is unraveling in front of it, because the man who doesn't need to speak is the man who's finally being heard. You've done the unthinkable. You stopped performing. You stopped being her reflection. You stopped editing your reality to match her emotional script. Silence doesn't collapse. It expands. And in that expansion, she discovers a terrifying new truth. She no longer controls the frame. When a woman realizes she's losing emotional grip, her instinct isn't to retreat. It's to declare war. She'll label you, she'll warn others, she'll turn calm judgment into public accusation. It's deep-rooted psychology. Carl Jung taught that the ego fights the self by destroying what it fears to see, and when you step into clarity and presence, she is forced to confront her own suspended shadow. So she uses words like weapons. You're emotionally unavailable. You're narcissistic. You're blocking me. These are not honest statements. They are projections, her version of reality rewritten into accusation. Because if she can't control your narrative, she'll dominate your reputation. How condemnation becomes her weapon. Vilification. Once you refuse to play her game, she sells you as the game breaker. Suddenly, friends and strangers see you as the problem. Not because you changed, but because your identity changed. 2. Emotional triangulation. She frames her critique as concern. I just want you to open up. Others absorb that emotional trajectory without hearing your presence. You become the man who needs healing, never the man who sees truth. 3. Cultural coup. She weaponizes labels. He's emotionally abusive, not because it's valid, but because it shifts social proof. The moment the crowd sides with her, you become silent in more than your voice. You vanish in reputation. Jungian depth, the shadow's mirror. Jung emphasized that projection isn't just emotional, it's subconscious protection. When she insists you're toxic, manipulative, cold, she's recounting her inner tyrant. You see what she can't. She calls it disloyalty. She calls it betrayal. But in truth, you no longer reflect her fractured identity. You reflect your integrity. That's what threatens her most. Transition from man to myth. She condemns you to keep her story alive. You silence her script by never playing it. Every condemnation she throws is a confirmation of your resolve. Her narrative becomes feedback, fuel for your detachment. She shouts, "You don't care." You remain stoic. She says, "Why won't you respond?" You stay peaceful, and this, more than any argument, anchors your value. Final pivot. Vindication in silence. If she's convinced others you're the problem, that's her illusion. Your strength doesn't lie in proving her wrong. Your strength lies in not needing to rebut her story. Because the man who stays true in absence doesn't require vindication. He becomes the myth in her hesitation, the silence in her storm, the reason she's still replaying verses she can't rewrite. She can condemn you, but only if you still exist in her emotional context. Once you exist outside it, you stop being her story. You become your own. What if I told you these men never defended themselves and became legends in silence? Case study 1. The philosopher who stood still. Carl Jung himself was accused of promoting toxic mysticism by critics who never studied his depth. He received harsh criticism as someone who forced others to confront their shadows. But Jung never backed down. He refused to explain his inner world to those unwilling to face their own. Instead, he wrote, lectured, and observed with steadfast conviction. His silence in the face of accusation became his mythology. People didn't follow Jung because they understood him. They followed him because his presence forced them to question themselves. Jungian lesson. The man who sees beyond the illusion often becomes the target. Yet his silence turns that attack into fuel for transformation. Case study 2. The ancient Stoic who didn't flinch, Seneca, was publicly humiliated during a political scandal rooted in jealousy. He was called apathetic and indifferent, not because he lacked emotions, but because he refused to react. He wrote letters calmly, never begging sympathy or pleading innocence. His silence stirred more fear than any defense could. He remained unshakable, and while rumors died, his reputation solidified. Jungian. Insight. Silence is the armor of the self. When others expect drama and you offer composure, you shift from accused to authority. Case study 3. The modern mystic who withheld pleading. A contemporary teacher of masculine psychology, unnamed, was lambasted online after being accused of emotional unavailability. Instead of defensive rants, he posted a single line. "Your judgment reveals more about your fear than my nature." He didn't argue. He refused the bait. Within 48 hours, his critics couldn't sustain the frenzy. Others began questioning her motives, not his framed statements. His silence became a viral pivot, marking him not as the accused, but the observer untouched by chaos. Jung's echo. The shadow projection only sticks when you engage. The moment you don't, her fear magnifies, hers becomes the story. Common thread, shadow projection and the refusal to flinch. Across eras, Jung, Seneca, modern teachers, the pattern is consistent. Vision invites attacks. Seeing too deeply makes you a threat. Silence grants distance. Unexplained stillness becomes unassailable. Projection rebounds. When they throw labels, you become the quiet judge. Narrative shifts. Observers lean toward the calm, not the loud. These men didn't argue, they watched. When insult landed, they didn't amplify it. They dissolved in patience. Why these case studies matter to you. 1. You're not alone. Many men who see reality face backlash. 2. Your silence is strategic, not weakness. It's your sovereignty. 3. Respect is earned in mystery, not explanation. These stories are blueprints, not exceptions. Final pre-exit pivot in case section. If she's branded you as cold, toxic, or unstable, don't panic. You didn't fail. You surrendered her emotional leverage by refusing to argue. So let the illusion collapse. Let your silence rise as your reputation. Because when she wins by narrative and you don't defend in presence, you've already made your move. You don't fight her anymore. You don't correct the record. You don't try to be understood. Because the moment you stopped explaining, you became the mirror she can't escape. And that mirror, it terrifies her. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But what happens when a man stops irritating her and just reflects her instead? When you remove your ego, remove your need to fix her perception, and simply become the reflection, you force her to confront the one thing she's run from her whole life, her shadow. She wanted control, not truth. She didn't want your clarity. She wanted command over your spirit. And when you wouldn't play the role, when you wouldn't dance for her accusation, you created cognitive dissonance. You refused the role of villain, refused to plead for innocence. Now her identity has no enemy to feed on. And when a woman's identity has no villain, it turns on itself. Your stillness becomes her breakdown. She lashes out. She's unstable, you're told to say. But you say nothing. Because you understand what's happening. She's cracking, not because you hurt her, but because your silence exposed the mask. You weren't the villain. She was never the victim. And now you've become the one thing Jung warned would bring the ego to its knees. The unconscious made conscious. Why she can't stop thinking about you. It's not your touch she misses. It's not your warmth. It's not even your love. It's your stillness in the fire, your refusal to flinch, your terrifying detachment that made her see herself. You became her unfinished question, her haunting, her mirror, and the psyche, especially the feminine psyche, never forgets the man who didn't need to defend himself, because that man isn't just a memory. He's a symbol of the self she couldn't control. Jung's final warning. Jung taught, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And you didn't just accept yourself. You didn't beg her to. You stood in your truth, unmoved, unapologetic, unexplainable. And in that moment, you didn't just win. You became unforgettable. The final law. Never forget this. When you argue, you lose the frame. When you defend, you accept guilt. But when you reflect, you force her to meet herself, and that's where you win, not in her heart, in her unconscious. Because long after she moves on, long after the messages stop, long after the silence becomes years, she will look in the mirror and see you. If this hit a nerve, like the video, subscribe, and if you believe in this message, support the movement using the link in the description. You're not here to be explained. You're here to be remembered. You're not here to be understood by women. You're here to make them understand themselves through you.